So let's discuss our Prime Minister. No, not him. I'm sick of talking about the blonde twat from America who admitted Class A drugs and conspired to beat up a journalist and should actually be deported, because that seems to be the way the government is doing things at the moment. If you're foreign born and you commit a crime in this country, they seem to want to deport you, unless you're white, of course. The only exception being Europeans, because there have been deportations from Romania, Poland, etc., who committed crimes and been deported. So Europeans, the bogeyman of the last 30, 40 years, they get deported. Jamaicans and Caribbeans, if they commit a crime, they get deported. But if you're from the US or Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and you commit a crime, you don't get deported. But I'm sick of talking about him. I want to talk about our real Prime Minister, Dominic Cummings, the official Prime Minister's most senior advisor. Now, yesterday, Boris Johnson carried out a major reshuffle of his cabinet. We saw Sajid Javid was the most prominent one, who resigned in the wake of this reshuffle, and he said that it was due to number 10 or Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings or whoever it is telling him that he had to wipe out, completely sack all of his advisors and appoint them with new advisors specifically handpicked by number 10. 10 Downing Street wants to tell its ministers who their advisors are. That is worrying, particularly in the wake of the deportation scandal, where Boris Johnson openly defied the courts and deported a bunch of Jamaicans anyway, even though they were said that it wasn't legal, it's not proper, because they didn't have the proper legal aid that they're entitled to. He went and deported them anyway. He defied the courts, or tried to defy the courts, when he prorogued Parliament. And the courts had to come out and say that is illegal. You cannot prorogue Parliament for that long just because you don't want scrutiny of your Brexit bill. And he had to recall Parliament. He hates the courts. His new Attorney General has actually said that she wants to get the courts out of politics. Get the judges not involved in politics. Now, if the judges aren't allowed to judge the decisions of our political leaders, that is very reminiscent of 1930s Europe, Germany, Italy. The judges are seen as these unelected, tosspots who can't make a decision, who aren't wise enough to know. That is very worrying, because the politicians are the most powerful people in the country. If there's anybody in this country who needs to be held accountable to the law, it's the fucking politicians. Now, I know there's the old adage of no parliament should be bound by its predecessors, and that's true. But there are centuries upon centuries of laws which have made their way into our constitution. We don't have a written, laid out, bare bones constitution like America does. Our constitution is made up of centuries and centuries of tradition and law and legislation. And many of those laws and legislations have been, up until now, deemed untouchable. You cannot touch them, such as the basic human rights legislations, the workers' rights legislations, things like that. They've been deemed you can't go near them, because they're vote killers. They'll get you swept out of office faster than you can blink and say, shit, what was that? And B, they're just not touchable. You just cannot do it, because if you try to sweep away these legislations, the courts are going to come out and they're going to say, you can't do that. It's against the law. And Boris Johnson, at least twice now, he has openly defied these courts. He wants to get them out of the way. And I'm willing to bet that if and when he brings out some draconian legislation, whether it's stripping away workers' rights, whether it's deporting any foreign-born criminal that he sees fit, if the courts get in the way, he's going to have them done away with. If the House of Lords gets in the way, as much as I have a lot of contempt for the House of Lords because they're completely unelected, completely unaccountable, they get £300, over £300 now, just for turning up a day, which is more than what the average universal credit claimant gets in a month. They're completely draconian and backwards, but there needs to be a second House of Parliament to hold the House of Commons accountable. Because when you have a whomping majority, like Boris Johnson does, you can do anything you like, and there has to be a second House to look through your legislation and hold you to account. That's just the way it has to be. The House of Lords needs drastic reform. I think the House of Lords should be entirely elected, personally, just to counteract the fact that if a Prime Minister has a huge majority, he should not be able to do anything he likes. Because when you start allowing governments to do anything you like, you end up with dictatorship. And that is what we're slipping towards. The Met Police the other day unveiled new facial recognition technology. You should be worried. Whether you voted Labour, whether you voted Tory, Green, UKIP, Brexit Party, you should be worried. Because this is backwards. This whole attitude of Boris is somehow anti-establishment, even though he's fucking Prime Minister. You cannot be more establishment than if you're Prime Minister. It doesn't get more establishment than the fucking government. Boris Johnson is not anti-establishment, he is the establishment. He is the embodiment of the establishment. Outside of that, take him out of government. And he went to Eton, for fuck's sake. He grew up privileged. He grew up with money. He is the establishment. And yet millions and millions of people turned out in early December and voted for him because he promised you Brexit. Because he said we're going to get Brexit finished, done. Fine, fair enough. I completely agree. The establishment, the political elite, the political establishment let us down over Brexit. It should have been, as soon as the referendum result was in 2016, whether or not it was legally binding, it was morally binding. And the government should have come out with a plan to leave the EU. And it should have gone back and forth between Commons and Lords and Commons and Lords until we got an acceptable plan to leave the EU, and then it should have been implemented. I completely accept all of that. But Boris Johnson wrote 2 articles. One for the benefits of leave, and one for how great it was if we remain. And he sat on them until right on top of the election, right on top of the referendum, and he released the one that he saw fit. The man is an opportunist. He is not against saying what he thinks you want to hear, just to get your support. So when he says we want to deport violent criminals who weren't born here, of course, on the face of it, that's a very popular policy, very popular idea, very good idea even, many would argue. And I fully support the deportation of rapists, murderers, kidnappers, arsonists, whatever they are, if they're not born here. Fully support that, fine, provided it's across the board. So whether you're born in Jamaica, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, USA, if you commit a crime, a serious crime, you should be deported back to your own country. I can get behind that. But that's not how it works, because people from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, USA, they haven't been demonised and seen as the enemy for as long as Europeans have, for as long as people of Caribbean and African descent have. These people have long, for at least the last 30 years, been seen as louts, yobs, thugs who go around mugging people and taking mobile phones and dealing weed. So that is why they're very easy. They're a stereotype that Boris can say, we're getting rid of them, we're getting them off the streets. Hurrah for Boris. He's getting rid of the criminals, when he's not really. He's getting rid of the select criminals who have served time for their crimes and in many cases turned their lives around because they're black. And it's as simple as that. And we are slipping towards fascism. Get worried. Get angry. Start panicking. Because behind him, pulling the strings, is his advisor Dominic Cummings, the man who was unelected, the man who was not held accountable by the British electorate. He is an advisor. But in his capacity as advisor, he is pulling all the strings. It was allegedly his idea that Sajid Javid get the boot. It was allegedly his idea that there be a cabinet reshuffle, and now Boris has surrounded himself with yes men, sycophants who will suck up to him, yes Boris, whatever you say Boris, rather than people who will criticise him. Anybody who dared to criticise Boris Johnson is gone from the cabinet. He has a cabinet of yes men, people who will do what he says when he says it. He's trying to build a dictatorship, and it is worrying. We need to do something about this man, and we need to do it now, because before you know it, you won't be allowed to criticise Boris on Facebook anymore. You won't be allowed to tweet him and tell him what a cunt he is. It will all be censored. It will all be shut down. And the very thing that right-wing individuals, Katie Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, Paul Golding, that they've been banging on about, free speech, will be censored. It will be stripped away by the state, not Twitter. When Tommy Robinson is banned from Twitter, that is not a violation of free speech. That is a private entity taking you off their platform because what you say is deemed too inflammatory to be acceptable. That's a completely different thing. You are more than welcome to go onto other platforms and spread your shit there. Telegram being a perfect example. When the state censors free speech, that is fascism, and that is what Boris Johnson wants to do. He's already started doing it within his cabinet. He's got a one-ping majority in the Conservative Party, in the House of Commons. Before the election, he wiped out 21 of his own MPs, sacked them, revoked the whip from them because they criticised him. He wants a party of sycophants, not just a cabinet, a whole party. He wants a House of Commons that is devoted to him and will do anything he says. And by definition, the House of Commons, which is filled with our elected representatives, he will have a nation of sycophants. That is the slope towards fascism. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.